Welcome everybody to today's webinar on risk management and how specifically within Vernon CMS we provide different files and fields to help you manage risks that are posed within your collection. Cultural and heritage organisations need to manage risks and hazards in their collections, both to protect their staff and the public, and of course the objects themselves. So some examples of risks and hazards include floods, theft, vandalism, chemical hazards, and pests. And we'll look at a set of examples of different cases of those. So in today's talk, the key things that I'm going to be covering are the condition and treatment sections within the catalogue record, the related activities for those two functions, the administration and risk assessment part of the object record, how you can flag restricted objects in different ways, managing insurance policies, and then last of all, how all of that ties together with our generic searching and reporting tools. And so the first thing we'll look at is the condition and treatment side of things. So I'll swap now to our demo system and go through some examples. Here I've searched for one of the wooden objects within our collection. It's a container made for storing betel nuts. Because it's made of wood, an organic material, it's subject to a number of different pests or agents of deterioration, and we might want to record details about both its condition and maybe specific treatment that's been done both to prevent further deterioration or to address deterioration that's already happened. And so those things are noted in the condition and treatment page of the object file. So on the left-hand side, we have the object file with all of its different windows, and I'll go into condition and treatment. And so it's important to accurately record the condition of an item so that you can over time detect whether there's a change, and you can use that information to help filter the objects that might be then used in a particular process. So objects that might be prioritized for treatment based on their current condition, or loans where you need to accurately show that the object has been preserved in the same state that it was either sent out or received by you. So here for this specific betel nut container, we can see that its current condition is that it has some borer damage on the underside of that container. We might have separately noted what the condition was at the time of acquisition. And so if you have done that, that's a very easy way to compare the current condition with what it was when it first arrived into your collection. We can then break that condition information down into more detail in the table below, including specifically the keyword field, which is a field that you can then use in that later searching. So for instance, when you're planning an exhibition, you might deliberately exclude all objects which are poor or fragile as condition keywords. And so for this object, we can see that back in 1999, it was marked as good, but we have subsequently found that there was the insect damage, and we've recorded different people that were involved in different dates for each of those actions. There are also third-party thesauri or keyword lists that can help you use these fields in a consistent way. And one example of those is the Art and Architecture Thesaurus, which is an optional add-on in Vernon CMS, and that includes a conditions keyword section. So if I click on options in our demo system, we've got the condition and effects section of the Getty Art and Architecture Thesaurus available, and I can just quickly show you the kinds of terms that are covered in that. The terms in grey are what we term as guide terms. They're terms that help the end user get directed to the most appropriate term that they're wanting to pick, but you're not allowed to use those specifically in a catalogue record. So they're only there to guide you through the hierarchy that exists there. So in this case, this is a wooden object, and I might specifically go into the conditions and effects for wood items. And so those are a number of different specific terms that only apply to wooden objects. We can also see further down the list lots of more generic condition categories that are included in that Getty thesaurus. The Getty Art and Architecture thesaurus covers a number of different facets of object cataloguing, including things like conditions, classifications, and styles and periods. So this is just one sample of a really huge number of terms that are available within that thesaurus. Secondly, we can record details about treatment that's been made to an object. And so we can see that as well as detecting the insect damage, there was later treatment done to help address that particular damage on the object. And again, we've got a treatment keyword field where you can put in consistent terms for later searching and reporting, and you can build up a history on those fields over time. I'll search for another example object. I'll search for the title print of a print series that I have. And so that's an inward loan. And so loans is an example where there would often be a condition report that's attached as part of that process, either simply summarizing the condition on this page, or if you have the activities module that manages those processes in a lot more detail, then there might actually be a condition report record. So at the time that you receive the object, you can record a detailed set of information about the condition, and that allows you to prove that you maintained it in that state for the whole period that you had borrowed the particular item for. And so here we've marked it as good, but we can see on the left-hand side, there's a tick next to management activities. So that means there are some related activity records for this particular object. If I click on that, we can see there's a number of different activities. There's 3 different renewed loans. There's an entry receipt. There was an exhibition, so that's probably the original purpose of that loan. But in this case, I wanted to show the condition report. If I double click on that, it'll jump me across to the related activity file where I can have individual condition reports either for single objects or groups of objects. All of the activity processes have some fundamental concepts that remain the same. All of them have a status field to say at what point in the life cycle of that process is it up to. So this might have originally been a request from the conservator. Somebody could later search for all of the outstanding requests and work on those, and then finally mark those as completed at some point. And so we can see here that there's more detail about this particular condition, so who worked on it and what things they noted. Similarly, a treatment might have a related treatment activity. So if I swap back to my condition and treatment page and search for a different object, I've got a vehicle that's in the collection. I've got a Ford Mustang, and so I'll search for that object. We can see that this particular Ford Mustang was marked that there was cleaning and general maintenance with a date as to when that happened, and it's marked that the particular maintenance that was done was that chemical hazards were removed. Specifically, the petrol was drained from the vehicle and the battery was removed. And again, there's related activity records that go into those processes in more detail. So if I swap to the management activities page for that vehicle, we can see that there is a pair of different treatment records. I could double click on the 2011 version and see more details about who was involved in that process and when it was done. So the treatment activity lets us track things initially at the request stage, where you might have a detailed list of what's proposed to be done, and then later that's completed with details of who performed it and what particular parts of the object were treated in different ways. So that includes who approved it at different points and different external contractors that might have been involved. So many of those fields are linking to the related person database in Vernon, and that's where you might be recording information like email and phone contact details for external people that are involved in each of these processes. Lastly, on the condition and treatment window, we've also got the possibility of tracking light exposure for light-sensitive objects. So I'll open up one of the records that I've got where we've been tracking that. So one of the paintings of an albatross in our collection. And if I swap to the light exposure tab, we can see the total time that this particular object has been involved in areas where there are light exposure issues. And then over time, the system's automatically totaling that exposure for us. We can override the light exposure defaults at any period if you know that the conditions weren't what was normal. So I've marked that actually there was a period where it was in transit, where we didn't have any particular light readings, but we know an estimate that we can record for that period. The system's doing that through the location history. So you can mark at different locations what the default level of light is, and then objects that are in those locations automatically inherit all of that data. So if it's in a particular location for 3 weeks and it knows what the light level is, it can calculate the light exposure from that. So we can see this object, for instance, is currently in the art storeroom. I could have a look at the location file to see how those light levels are defined. I can do that by going to the database menu and choosing other files, and I can go specifically to the location file where I'm defining all of the different areas that we have control over. Those light levels or lux levels can be recorded at any point in the hierarchy of locations. So the art storeroom might actually be broken down into a number of different bays, racks, and maybe very small units. You can just record a light level at the whole room level, and any object in that room, regardless of whether it's in a much more specific location, will still be able to get that light reading. So if I search for art storeroom, was the one that we saw that object was located in, we can see that there is in fact 4 different racks, but I'll just look at the top level. And so I've marked that there's an average light level of 90 lux, and that those lights are on typically for 60 hours a week. So you're just giving those rough calculations. So you might take several light readings over a period. You might calculate what times those particular rooms are normally in use. And from that, you'll be able to get your total light exposure over time for all of the objects. As well as the condition and treatment, we then have the administration and risk assessment window. There we can record some general flags that help us group together objects that have certain conditions, certain general flags or restrictions that we want to be able to search by. But we can also note in detail any risks that are posed to a particular object and any hazards that are present in them. In some cases, risks and hazards can be the same thing. An example would be that paper-based material might be at risk to damage from water. So water is the particular risk or hazard type. And then you might also have an artwork, which is a complex sculpture involving water containers. And you could say water is a hazard that's actually present in that object. You might then take care about where you store that sculpture so that if it was ever damaged, it's not going to affect high-risk objects which are easily damaged by that water. So I'll switch back to the demo system and we'll have a look at that particular window. So that's on the left-hand side. We can go to administration and risk. This particular painting, there aren't any particular risks or hazards that are noted, but I'll bring up one of the records where I know that has been recorded. I've got a sculpture, a wooden sculpture, which has been painted. And that sculpture is called Man in the Computer. And then we'll switch to tab 2, which is our risk assessment tab. So there's no specific risks to objects that have been noted. but this is a wooden object. We might say that it's at risk to pests, and we could describe borer as being an example pest that it might be at risk to. But in this object, the paint has been analysed and it's been found to be lead paint, which is toxic, and then that affects how you might later handle or work with that object. So both risks and hazards link to the risk and hazard type file, and that's a complex file in its own right. So I'll click on lead toxins there, and I'll use the go to button at the top to view the details about that particular hazard type. So that's going to take me to the risk hazard type file within Vernon, where I can record as little or as much information as I wish about that hazard. So in this case, I've linked it to specific material types. Again, that's using art and architecture thesaurus, the material list in this case. We can describe different specific impacts that we would expect from this hazard. So I've marked that human and animal health is a particular negative outcome that might happen. You might give a summary of your internal museum policies for dealing with objects that have that hazard present in them. And then there may be other further details. You might be using a specific government hazard classification scheme. You could note that particular classification term that ties to this. There might be specific authorized locations where objects that have that hazard present must be stored. So maybe all of the chemical hazard objects are stored in a particular area to keep them away from other objects. And then vice versa, there may be specific locations where you shouldn't be storing those objects because there's other items that would be of particular risk to those hazards. Back on the object cataloging window, one of the things it does is show this protected column, which is automatically showing us those procedure and policy notes. So you record those notes once on the hazard and risk type file, and then anywhere that it's been linked to from an object, the end users, the catalogers, the registrars will always be able to see a summary of that policy. That's configurable in the system, so that's like a one-line display which we see for objects. We can configure what's the summary that appears in that field based on any of the related fields that are in that risk and hazard type file. So you might also want to show the classification code because that's important within your collection, and that could be automatically included in that summary here. If I show an example of an object which has been marked as having a specific risk, I've got a sculpture which is called the brain, and that's a glass sculpture which has light fixtures. If I click on risk assessment, I've marked that that is a high risk for theft. It's a very small object, it's very high value, so it's the kind of thing which could be more easily stolen when it's on display. And so I've marked that theft is high risk, who particularly assessed it as that, and any notes about why that's the case. In the case of risk and hazards, there's also a related activity file called the risk management activity. I'll be showing that shortly, but I'll just show a couple of slides showing how other clients are making use of the fields that are available here and some external resources that would be useful to you. So this is a screenshot shared by Auckland Museum from Megan Harvey when she presented about their work managing risks and hazards. So this is showing a breakdown of that risk and hazard type file and the particular categories they've created. So they've created a broad top-level term to distinguish hazards and objects and risks to object, and then we can see the general categories that they've put underneath that. Similarly, the Museum of Transport and Technology shared in a presentation they did for us how they're making use of the classification file. Within New Zealand, there's a standard legal classification system for hazardous objects, and they've created the top-level terms and the narrower terms for each of those different categories. So we can see that all of the items that are toxic to people are classified as hazardous substance number 6. And so because they've created those as terms in Vernon, they can consistently flag those objects within the collection. So a couple of external resources. The first one here is from the United Kingdom, and this is a guide to hazards in collections. I'll open up that website. It works as just a guide through, allowing you to select common hazards and then step by step walking you through the different considerations about that hazard. So if we go through one example, for example, if we looked at asbestos, it'll give us a summary about what that particular hazard is. And then when I continue, it'll give me a guide where I can step through what kind of hazard is it, why is it hazardous, things to look out for, how would you actually detect that or visibly see that hazard, what kinds of objects might have that hazard present in it, and in the UK, what specific laws are around the handling and use of that material. So that's a really useful resource for some of the hazardous materials that are most commonly found within museum collections. I mentioned the MOTAT thesaurus, where they've got within the classification file the New Zealand classification system for hazardous materials, and this is the website about those materials. We'll see those categories that we saw within the MOTAT screenshot. So here's a website where you can go live to all of the details that relate to each of those classified hazards. So the legal risk constraints around them, as well as the actual hierarchy for those if you wanted to create the broadest levels or perhaps some of the slightly more specific levels directly within your copy of Vernon CMS. So back within Vernon, we've looked at the administration and risk assessment. In addition to that, we've got the activity file for risk management. So if I look at one of the objects where we have created a risk management record, so in the activities file section, risk management is one of those files, and I'll open up risk management. And so this is the risk management record that was created when the man at the computer sculpture was assessed. So the paint on that particular sculpture was analysed. We've got details about when that happened. We've got details about the outcome of that assessment. So we confirmed that the object does have lead paint. And then we can have on the recommendation tab any proposed change in what we do based on that. So we could have basic summaries of how that object is going to be handled in the future. So that's an example where we're looking at a particular risk in an object. The risk management activity can also be used to manage checks for hazards and also incidents where you've found a problem. So if I open up another record, so this is a record where you might have been doing periodic checks for particular pests. Those checks might be happening outside of Vernon. You might have an automated insect trapping system where it's detecting things every single day, and you're not necessarily going to record all of that high-level checking detail inside Vernon. But you might be recording when a specific incident has happened. So when you've actually found some kind of pest that needs a follow-up action within your collection management. So here I've marked that I've got a procedural status of incident. That's something that's come out of one of our routine assessments. And the particular incident was that we've found carpet beetle eggs in one of our storerooms. So that's something where that particular pest then could spread amongst a range of different textiles that we've got in that storeroom. And so based on that, you might have a specific recommendation. So the standard process might be from that point to fumigate the whole room, and then all of the textile items which may have already been infected with that pest you could then go through a process where they're frozen for a specific period, long enough to kill any dormant eggs that are already present in those textiles. Another area where we can flag objects that need some specific attention is in the administration page in the restriction table. So I'll bring up one of the particular objects where there is a restriction. I'll just search by the accession number. So the restrictions might not specifically be things like risks or hazards. In this case, the object is culturally sensitive. So you could say there's actually a risk to the audience of the museum. You risk culturally offending somebody if that object is used or displayed in a way that's inappropriate. And so we could record that as part of the administration details on the object. So I'll scroll back up to the object section on the left and go back into the administration page. We can see then that for this specific object, I have marked a restriction, and I've marked that this is culturally sensitive. Another example of a particularly restricted type of object would be human remains. If you had human remains through a medical collection or through fossil human remains, you might want to specifically flag those, and you can use tools like Vernon's data security to even limit who has access to those particular records. You might want to make those flags particularly visible, and that could be done through having a symbol where you present that as part of the one-line summary of the object. So we can see up the top here, I've shown a diamond, but that could be whatever symbol makes sense. It could be a little skull icon. And that's something where we describe on our customer portal how to set up those restriction symbols using things like general flag or restriction types. That's the symbol that we can see circled in red. If I then click on that link, that'll take me to our customer support portal where I'll see the article, and it'll go through step by step how we go about creating a warning flag, which would then be visible anywhere that that one-line summary of an object shows. So that'll be in List Manager when somebody's adding things for an exhibition. It'll be in different search results. It'll be at the top of every cataloging screen they access. The next thing that we can cover is insurance policies, that if something goes wrong, it's really important to know what insurance coverage your museum has and then how you could actually make use of that. So that's another one of the activity files in the system. I'll scroll down to the activities module and open up an example insurance record. So the first record I've got in the system is an original policy we've had, which is now expired. And so we can record those policies and over time note the duration that they're valid for and any changes that take effect, and also details of who's the insurer for that. And so here's the current policy. We can see who the insurer is, who the broker was, and because those are linking to the person database, we can record any specific details about things like the claims process. So I could click on the Go To button again to go to a related person record, and we can then record any contact information we want and any related notes. So for this particular agent, I've recorded what their free phone telephone number is, and I've marked that specifically as being the claims number. All of that then is supported by the generic searching and reporting facilities within Vernon. We've got example YouTube videos already online that go in detail on those topics. And so those are just the generic facilities where you can use things like advanced search to do step-by-step searches on any of the various keyword and controlled fields that we've been looking at today. So you could do a report to find all of the incidents that had happened in the risk management file in a specific period. You could search to find all of the objects that have been flagged as fragile. You could search to find all of the condition reports that have been done in detail that fall within some certain category. So if I did an example of a search and a subsequent report, let's say we want to have a look at the condition reports that were completed in a particular period. I can go back to the condition report activity and I can use the advanced search button to then search step by step on several different fields. I might first want to search on the procedural status to narrow it down to only the ones that have been completed. But if I was the conservator, I might be regularly searching for everything that's currently sitting at the requesting stage so that I know about what my workload coming up is going to be. So let's search for procedural status of completed. I could then narrow that down and say, well, I'm only wanting things that were completed within a certain range of dates. So maybe only the ones that were completed in a particular year. So maybe only the ones in the year 2000. And there's one single record. From there, we've got the full list manager tool to manage groups of results and the full reporting tool to both do ad hoc reports where we just build a report on the fly and pre-saved report templates where we can even integrate with Microsoft Word using Word mail merges to have very complex formatted reports. You can mark report templates as being quick reports that you can easily rerun again in the future. And if you've marked a report as being a standard report, then it's just available through this quick report shortcut. So I clicked on that. It'll show me any report templates that have been marked as standard reports. So this is a Word merge type report where it is integrating with Microsoft Word. And that would then automatically open that template and take the data from the current record, formatting it according to that layout. And so that might generate us now a hard copy of that report that we're printing out and storing, or it might be a PDF that you save and then forward on to the lender of that object, for example. The last thing I'll show is just one other example of an external resource that's available. So similar to the UK example, this is the New Zealand equivalent where they show different hidden hazards that are present in objects in museum and gallery collections. It's a website that was developed by Otago Museum through a New Zealand grant. And again, it walks you through those common different hazards, presenting what things to look out for. So if I expand the list of hidden hazards, again, we'll see asbestos as an example, and each of those I could then click into to get more resources about why these things are things we should be worried about and what we can do to address those. So that covers all of the key features within Vernon CMS for helping you manage risks that are present in your collection. Thanks everyone for your time today.